Check. The man sitting across from me at a Starbucks in 2009 was studying something online. I couldn't help but notice his giant army rucksack and his gearbox and really outdated laptop. And he was chewing on a pen. Every day I would see him and I would see him chewing on this pen but clattering away. I was reading the Wall Street Journal in front of my face. I had just been transplanted to Arizona, came out here to have to take care of my mother in kind of like a last minute emergency. I had been working at a Pacific radio station for over 8 years as an engineer and operations person, editing and working very closely with the news team. And I found myself desperate, looking for something to do to deploy my skills and my passions in news and creativity and writing. And here I was kind of stuck. And one day I leaned over and I asked him, "Why are you chewing on that pencil? What's up with that?" And I'm going to refer to the person as Mr. Hughes. Mr. Hughes was a name that we had to create for him so we could communicate. Mr. Hughes, it turns out, was studying for his degree in counterterrorism online. Counterterrorism, sitting there in a Starbucks. So we got into this conversation. It turns out that he had this chewing pencil thing because he was dyslexic, beyond legibility and comprehension, and trying to write his papers, and he would have to scribble these little notes and then translate it. So I said, "I think I can help you." So we struck up a relationship, and eventually we exchanged notes and emails and so on, and I helped him to transcribe his essays for his counterterrorism degree. He really did the research, but I put them together kind of, as the scribe. So after he got his degree, Mr. Hughes disappeared. I didn't see him again for a long time. After 2010, he graduated. In 2011, I got an email from Mr. Hughes. He was in the green zone in Baghdad. He had been in the army for 14 years, and he recently retired so that he could join forces with the PMC, private military contractor. And he would be making tenfold the salary that he was making in the army, and more than in reserves. But he needed my help. Turns out that he was hired by this PMC, private military contractor, to write what we call strategic messaging for the PR department. That's a polite word for propaganda. Conveying the American message to the people of Afghanistan, to try to influence them, to let them know that we had a stake in their country and what we were going to do. So we're going to bring democracy to the people of Afghanistan. He needed my help, so he called. When he emailed me from the Green Zone, he asked me if I would ghostwrite for him. And I thought, wow, it's like being the Cyrano de Bergerac of democracy. He could ghostwrite. I mean, here I was doing absolutely nothing but taking care of my mother, really wanting to deploy my skills. It wasn't going to be about the money. And I wasn't naive about what was going on over there. I had been at a Pacifica station. I knew very well what was going on. I didn't agree with the war. But this was exciting, and I was going to use my skills, and it was kind of exotic. It's like being like Valerie Plame, the CIA agent who couldn't tell her husband what she was doing for like 20 years. Or like being Wonder Woman, you can't tell your boyfriend you're in the Justice League. Right? It was exotic. So I said, yeah, I signed on. So we created the Mr. Hughes and the email, and he had me my clearances, and we used the military form of Skype called UVU, so we could communicate. And I had to be ready to transcribe these messages, like on a spur of a moment. And what these messages were, broadcasts that were going out over Voice of Afghanistan to the people in Afghanistan to get them to go out and vote in a war-torn nation. Now, the idea of democracy was something that they didn't really understand. And yet you can't go clobbering them over the head with it and shouting from the rooftops or from the towers. You can't just go saying to people, get out and vote, because they don't really understand democracy. So what we had to do was to tell them why you have a choice and to clear the way for the elections that were coming up. Now, these are people that weren't used to choices. The idea of choice is not really important to them because their choices are made by tradition, by elders, by imams and ayatollahs. They don't really look for choices. So what we had to do was send out these broadcasts to root out corruption. Corruption was something that was taking place. You see, suddenly the idea of voting, the idea that you could run for office, everybody and their uncles and cousins wanted to have an office. Everybody themselves wanted to be in office. It was like a backlash that even Donald Rumsfeld didn't see because everybody thought, okay, I want this farm, I want these goats. And they all wanted to do this. So corruption started to take place. The people would be appointed by their local imams and mullahs, and so there were bribes that were taking place. And the idea of these broadcasts was to tell the people that if you witness corruption, you should report it to this local corruption office, which was manned by a mullah and a private military contractor. So really, nobody was going to do this, but that was the idea of these broadcasts, to clear out, root out corruption. But more importantly, the unintended consequence of the Americans being there was that we were creating corruption. Suddenly, every roadway was an opportunity to be blocked off until you paid $800 in the equivalent money to pass. Our convoys couldn't get through without paying money. Bakshish. Suddenly, every shopkeeper was going to take bakshish because they could get something to the contractors that within their network, whatever you wanted, you know. I mean, Baskin-Robbins 31, you could get that in Baghdad in the green zone, but in Afghanistan, you had to go to the shopkeepers. Even the policemen were involved in the corruption. I mean, you wanted to get Sherman cigarettes, cashmere sweaters, hashish, a moped, a ride to the forbidden zone. All these things could be arranged. So there was a lot of bakshish. So we had to try to stop this, root this out. As the elections approached and they had their version of primaries, suddenly I started to notice things happening that made me feel very uneasy about what I was transcribing. School buses were rammed into by unknown cars to try to stop people from going to the polls. They were using buses. The polls were being burned, ballot boxes were being stolen, miscounts. Women, what was important to state about this, I have to say, the idea, the symbol of the purple finger, that became the symbol of the vote. If you dipped your finger in purple ink, just like they did in the election for Noor al-Maliki in Iraq, dipping your finger in purple ink meant that you were voting. You did that, you put your fingerprint on a piece of paper and stuffed it in a box. That box could be an orange box, a cigarette box, a wool box. Those boxes were lost, and the whole thing became, well, religious leaders couldn't control it even. And they began also to see that the idea of voting was almost blasphemous to them. You don't vote, you get your choices made for you by your religion, by your beliefs, by how you carry on your life. That's who gets the offices. So the women were beginning to use this purple finger as a symbol of not just voting, but of revolution. The idea that you could have this purple finger didn't even just mean that you voted. Every woman was now using purple scarves, purple fingers, to show that they were revolting against the oppression of women in their country. So it wasn't even just the men that thought that this was blasphemous, but the women elders started to see their own daughters as being radicalized by the Americans, as disobedient, shameful, ahira, whorish, ahira. And they didn't even want their daughters to go out. So the vote came and went, the election came and went, and there were horror stories of girls, of women that were coming back from the polls with their fingers broken, even cut off. You heard of stories of the acid thrown in the faces of the women that were leaving the polls. These are true stories. It wasn't reversed propaganda. This really happened. I began to feel remorse for what I was doing. And after the elections, my PMC went dark. Means I didn't hear from him for a long time. And I wasn't needed anymore. In 2013, I got an email from Mr. Hughes. He was in Kandahar. He wanted to know if I would sign on for another round of ghostwriting to show that the Americans that were still there had a reason to be there, because we were installing water purification systems in Kandahar and schools for girls. You know what happened to a lot of these girls? The acid thrown in the faces, the cars ramming into the bus stops. When he asked me to sign on again, I declined. Now I know that I'm really lucky to live in a democracy, and I'm not ashamed of what I did. I really believed that there was meaning to it. But democracy isn't for everyone. The thing is, nobody ever asked them. So in November, when you go out to the polls, or when November rolls around and you think about whether or not you're going to go to the polls, just remember, you don't have to risk death to vote. You don't have to risk being disfigured for life to cast a ballot. At worst, as we say, you just have to hold your nose and pull the lever. Thank you.